So 6.3 is gene expression. By gene expression, as I kind of said, is how a gene on a chromosome is going to express the information that it carries. And remember that every cell in your body has all the information. But you don't need all the information all the time. When the information is needed, then we need to activate or turn on a gene. So some genes are turned on during a certain part of your life or turned off during a certain part of your life. So up until you reach puberty, you know, the things that make guys look like guys and girls look like women, those genes were turned off, weren't they? So, you know, other than sometimes girls having longer hair than guys, you really can't distinguish a fourth grade, you know, if you would shave the head of a fourth grade girl and boy, stand them side by side, you might not be able to tell, you know, what sex they are sometimes, because there's not that much difference in between them. But when you get to puberty, that gene gets turned on that makes girls look like women and guys look like men. So some of these genes need to be turned on, and some of these genes are producing certain proteins, right? We talked about that in the previous chapter, where a gene carries the information for a specific amino acid. Now, do all genes code for amino acids? Well, the answer is no, but what are some other things that genes code for? Think of that process of making a protein. What is it? How does it know when to start? Well, remember on the messenger RNA, it has to begin with a start codon, right? And then we have the next gene after that, or the next code that came from a gene, is going to have the, like for an amino acid. But how does it know when to end making the protein? Well, there has to be a what? A codon for stopping, right? A stop codon. So not every gene is going to code for something, like a specific amino acid to make a protein. They code for other things. But they aren't always active all the time. They are only active, you know, when they get turned on or activated. So there's going to be different things that we'll talk about here in a moment that turn those genes on. Now, when genes get turned on, one of the things that it will do is it will cause some of the cells become different than others. Remember we talked about there's a cellular level, and then there's the tissue level, and then the tissues become organs, and organs become systems. Well, the cells have to become different. So that process of where these cells become specialized is called cell differentiation. Okay? And what does it result in? It results in something called morphogenesis. What does morph or morpho mean? If something morphs, what do we mean?
To like change.
It changes. Okay? Changes form. And then genesis means what?
Genesis means like the beginning.
Beginning. So this is the beginning of a form. Think of the word. So these cells that are not different than each other, at some point they start becoming different from each other. Some of these cells will, for instance, like we look here at the hand, you know, they're probably on the mass of cells that we start with. At some point there will be one place where these cells become different and they start to grow what will be the arm. And there's probably, and for us, there should be normally 2 places where that should happen, where arms should start to appear. Now, do you see the whole thing, fingers and all, starting at once? No, first it starts out as a bump, and it gets longer, and then eventually it'll become two pieces, because we have a forearm and an upper arm, and then at some point the fingers will start to become different than that. So they're changing form. Now, if we were, and they have done this on animals, if when the cells start to differentiate, if they surgically remove those cells, like they've done that with some embryonic animals, and they've surgically removed where the eye was, and they have grafted it onto a different part of the body, and then allowed it to continue to develop, when they hatch out or when they're born, whatever it is, there's actually a fully developed eye. Not here in the forehead or on the head, but maybe back here on the side of their body. So once they get to differentiation, they're down this path sort of like of no return. Now, there are cells that we have discovered that we have in our body that have not differentiated yet. Does anybody happen to know what those are? We often use those as treatment for certain diseases where they're defective. Ever heard of stem cells? Now, stem cells are cells that are not different yet. So we can implant those in places, and they then will often take on the characteristics of the cells that we put them in. So those are stem cells. Now, what's the problem with stem cell research? Why are people often against it? Well, where are we harvesting our stem cells from? From the fetus of aborted babies. Okay? So that's why, the source is the problem. Not that we have anything against stem cells. We're against where they are harvesting the stem cells. So, as Christians, we need to, if that's a good idea, good technology, or, for solving some of these health issues, let's come up with another way that we can harvest stem cells without having to rely on aborted fetuses. Now, the cell differentiated is controlled by some genes that we refer to those genes as homeotic genes. They're like master control genes. They turn on the differentiation, so they control what this cell will become. Down here it talks about if there's a mutation in the homeotic gene in a fruit fly, those look like little gnats, but you can tell they're a fruit fly. If you in the sun's light, you can actually see little red eyes, little red dots. Okay, on a fruit fly, if there's a mutation in that gene that controls the development, it can actually cause eyes to actually grow in weird places where flies don't have eyes, So what controls cell differentiation or differences like that? Well, one thing that controls us is molecular factors. We kind of talked about that. Like when you go through puberty, what turns on some of these genes?
Can I take a guess? Testosterone. Am I right?
The what?
Testosterone.
Okay, in guys, it's testosterone. And so guys start developing male characteristics. So that would be the molecule or the molecular control for guys. What is it for girls?
Is it estrogen?
It's estrogen. Okay? Estrogen is what causes girls to develop into women. But all through preschool, early elementary, maybe starting to late elementary, those genes have been turned off. So guys, girls and boys don't look all that much different. And when you're playing sports, they can play together. Now it's when those genes get turned on, there's enough differences that, we find it better that they don't have to play together. It's not fair to play together, but they get turned on. Now, there are also some. Now, on this topic of molecular, if you have observed female gymnasts that are really good at that, what do you notice about female gymnasts compared to their female counterparts that are not gymnasts? What do you notice? The high level of activity that they're involved in has suppressed that turning on of that gene for developing female characteristics. So they don't exhibit most of the female characteristics. Like females, their hips get a little wider. There's a little more fatty tissue in their body. But all the things that we associate with a female, it's been suppressed. Now, interestingly enough, what do you think happens when they stop performing at that high level? That gene gets turned on, and they develop into a female, and they look just like regular women. But for that period of time, so there are other things that can control, like environmental factors can actually control that. Now, another example of an environmental factor would be, like if you have animals that live where it gets really cold in winter, and there's a lot of snow. Well, what color would not be a good color to have in winter? Most wild animals are what color typically? Grays and browns, right? Because they blend in with their environment. But that wouldn't be a good color to have in winter. So sometimes with some animals, when it starts getting colder, they will lose their brown hair and grow white hair during the winter months. Some birds will go from being brownish colored to being white colored because they're going to be living where there's snow. And then the reverse will happen in spring. When it starts warming up, they'll lose their white feathers or hair, and they will then go back to being brown. So that's an environmental factor that turns on and off those genes that have to do with what color the feathers or the fur will be. So, here's one of the things that we will talk about in the future when we're talking about different animals. There are some animals that we thought were originally in different species, but the difference between these two is one of them is experiencing a different environmental factor than the other. In one that it's turned on and the other one it's turned off. You bring this one over here where it's turned on and it experiences that environmental condition and it looks just like this one over here. So we realize they're not different species, they're actually the same one. They just happen to live in different environments. Now, let's talk about cancer, because that's kind of what comes up in this topic of cells differentiating. Sometimes cells become cancerous. Our definition that we're using in this book, and is commonly, I think, used, is cancer is an unrestrained cell growth. The cells in your body don't just grow unrestrained, otherwise we'd have lumps all over us, that where they were growing out of control. So they are being controlled. And something happens with some cells where they escape the normal control that our body has over the cells, and in that process they become cancerous. Now, What are some terms that often are associated with cancer? We use the word tumor. A tumor is just an abnormal mass of cells produced by abnormal cell division. So here we have some cells that have continued to divide when there really, in reality, is no need for them to continue to divide. We don't need any more of those cells. They just keep going. Now, we'll talk in a moment what can cause that. Now, if the tumor happens to be what we call benign, it means the cells that are cancerous stay inside the tumor. Quite often there's kind of like something, like a case around it, some tissue around it that keeps those cells all separated from the cells that are around it. And and these cells that are inside this don't go elsewhere. They're just stuck right there. So it's benign. Usually, that's a good thing because typically we can remove those cells surgically, and then we can get rid of that tumor. The problem is the other kind. Now, what do we call it? Does anybody know the word? What do we call it if cancer cells have been spreading to other parts of the body? In other words, they're not staying with the tumor anymore. They're starting to move elsewhere. What do we call that? You know what that word is? Have you heard the word metastasize? Metastasize, they'll sometimes say that the cancer has metastasized, means that some of these cancerous cells are now moving to other parts of the body and affecting other organs. So you can maybe have cancer in one organ, but if it metastasizes, these cells can end up going elsewhere. And now that, you've heard the terminologies, people will say the cancer has spread. Well, that means it has metastasized. It's going to other places. So you might have, let's say, a woman that started out with breast cancer and had it all, removed and went through chemotherapy, and they all seem to be fine and good. But if there's some of those cells that moved elsewhere, and one of the things they quickly or will often do is they will check the lymph nodes, because these cells move around through the bloodstream. And the lymph nodes are kind of like our blood filters. And if they find some of these cells in the lymph nodes, that means it's already starting to spread. And when it starts to spread, then it starts to pop up at other places, and quite often, it just becomes unmanageable, and then they will end up succumbing to the cancer, because you find it. So for instance, it might start out as breast cancer, but then it may end up going into the bones, and then they have bone cancer, or they might have it goes to the brain, and they'll have brain cancer. You can just have cancers at other various parts of the body once it starts to spread. Okay. So the purpose of treatments like chemotherapy, which is a generic type of treatment, is, they put that into your body, into your bloodstream, and they want it to go to all parts of your body. Guess what they're trying to do? They're trying to track down the cancer cells wherever they may have gone and trying to get rid of those. Now, now somebody might ask in the other class, and we might as well talk about that now. Why do we do chemotherapy and radiation? Why do we pick that? Well, we've discovered that cancer cells are actually not very healthy cells. They're not very healthy because they're dividing so quickly, is maybe one of the reasons. And so we've discovered that these cells that are not very healthy, when exposed to chemicals, certain chemicals that we have discovered work, we can make these cells, like they weren't healthy to begin with, maybe make them sick enough that they die, in effect. Now, radiation, we tend to use that when the cancer is just like in one area, and we can't get all of it. then they will use radiation to kill the rest of it. Quite often they can't get it because it's maybe wrapped around something else that in the process of trying to remove it, we might cause more harm than leaving it there and then trying to kill it with radiation. So cancer cells are susceptible to chemical chemotherapy or radiation, and hopefully, they will die off. So we often, if you notice that they'll give people, they'll have a treatment for a certain number of days and then they'll stop. Well, even though the cancer cells are not the healthy ones and they're going to be the ones that are being killed by it, the healthy cells, the ones we want to keep, are not healthy because of that. They're not sick enough to die, but they're kind of sick. So we need to give them some period of time to rejuvenate. Then when everything is, the cells are healthy again, then we hit it again with another round of chemo or more radiation. Usually don't do too many radiations, but chemo, they can have many rounds of that. And hopefully, after enough of these, that we've killed all the cancer cells. Now, what cancer have you heard is probably has the highest mortality rate? What do we mean by mortality rate? What does that mean?
Death.
It has the highest number of people die from it. You know what cancer it is? It happens to be a cancer that you don't even know you have it until by the time you start to know that there's something not right, you've already reached maybe stage 4 cancer, and you two, let's see, you've got both of them are, what do you think it is? Is that what you're going to say? Pancreatic cancer is the worst. I have a student that I had in Kansas City who's now married, and she lives in Des Moines. She had pancreatic cancer, and she had I guess it was a new form of treatment, or a procedure, I should say, for pancreatic cancer, and it was called the Whipple procedure. She had it done at, if you've ever had people that have cancer and it's pretty serious, they often go to Texas to, I think it's the MD Anderson Cancer Treatment Center. She had a procedure done called the Whipple procedure. I'm not sure, they removed certain things with that, and but the survival rate is really low. The number of people that make it to 5 years is only 9%. That means 91% of the people will never make it to 5 years after having had, pancreatic cancer. She's made it to 9 years. I think it was this summer when she made it to the 5-year mark. I'm sorry. So she's one of that 9%. But there's never a guarantee, with cancer. I've known of people that seem like they licked cancer. My wife has a former boss. She thought she had licked breast cancer. But a month or two ago, they found out it came back again. So, cancer is an awful thing. And so, everything we can learn about cells just maybe someday will make us be able to figure out how can we make those cancer cells, how can we turn off their switches so they go back to behaving normal. Yes?
If cancer comes back, is it harder to overcome if it's a second
Well,
time?
so often it's done this. It's now in so many other places, it's hard to track, I remember Mrs. Hughes saying that about her mom. Now that they were starting to find it, it was kind of they discovered it in many different places in her body. But when it gets to that point, that, well, that's the beginning of that final process. Not a fun process to go through, but the beauty is that the package you came in, your body, is not a forever package. We're going to get rid of it. We're going to get one that will live forever. never have cancer, you know. So I know that's what we're all looking for too, you know. Right now when your package is in awesome shape yet, you know, I'd like to keep it. But when you get older like me, I wouldn't be opposed to having a new one that will live forever. Now, substances that actually increase your likelihood of developing cancer are called carcinogens. Carcinogens. If you live in the state of California, or you make stuff that you plan on selling in California, they expect you to label all the substances in there that they have determined are carcinogens. And they got long lists of stuff, you know. Now, some of these things, you know, they've determined that they cause cancer in laboratory animals. Doesn't mean that humans necessarily get cancer from that. You know, we may not have any direct evidence of that. But that's what we mean. They increase your risk. So what are some things that you know of increase your risk of certain kinds of cancer?
Smoking.
Okay, smoking, the nicotine, we know can increase your risk of having lung cancer. Or if you chew, it'd be throat cancer. So, yeah, that would be one. Anything else?
Can I take another guess?
What?
I only have a guess this time.
You're gonna. This time it's a guess. Okay, that's fine.
Alcohol for like your liver.
Yeah, I don't know if that, you know, because we know alcohol can, if you consume too much of it, because your body, the liver is the part of your body that processes all these things that aren't really supposed to be in your body, alcohol being one of them. And your liver can handle a small amount of alcohol, but when you give it large doses, you can actually end up ruining the liver, and we call it, oh my goodness, I just forgot the word. Cirrhosis of the liver is the word, I guess. Yeah, but alcohol could be a carcinogen in certain situations. So we know that certain things, when you're exposed to those, increase your risk of certain kinds of cancer. So in your body, everybody's body, you have two of these things. These two things. One's they're actually two kinds of genes: proto-oncogenes and tumor suppressor genes. And that's where we'll stop.